Okay, so here we go with my review of Frozen 2. I just went and saw this last night because I happen to live in the city with a theater that has a little bit of an early release the day before. So before I start this review, I need to give you a couple of caveats. The first one is, I'm going to start with no spoilers and just give my general recommendation about whether you should see it and stuff like that, or whether I would personally recommend seeing it, and then I'm going to get into full spoilers, because one thing that drives me crazy is when you go to watch a review and you get like 10 minutes in and the person finally just says something like, I'm not going to give it away, and you're just kind of like, why did I watch like half this review? Why did I watch half this 20-minute review for you to say that you're not going to give this thing away? I clearly want to hear you talk about it, so I am going to talk about those plot-heavy things later on, and I'm going to just be getting into the ending and how I felt about it and all that other kind of stuff. The second caveat is that I don't experience movies the same way as most other viewers do. With my sight being the way it is, I do have trouble seeing in dim environments, and movie theaters are very dim environments. There is some technology, which is called audio description, which I use to listen to what's going on for those parts that I have trouble seeing, so I still know what's going on in the movie and everything, but that is a little bit of a difference in how I experience movies. Okay, so Frozen 2, my thoughts. Mostly, I didn't like it. I didn't like it that much. I was never really a fan of the first movie that much. I thought it was okay. I liked the animation for sure. I liked the music for sure. I thought the animation sequences with Let It Go were really great. There were some funny moments. It was cute. A pretty good Disney movie. I just never really thought it was that great. It was never my favorite. But surprisingly, I liked the second one even less. I thought the story just wasn't as good. It just kind of dragged, and it was a different kind of story. I will give them that. But it didn't really hold my attention that much. I found myself being very bored. Again, I have to say, I liked the music. That's something I usually say with movies that I don't like from Disney. They usually at least have good music if they're musicals, and this had some really good songs in it that I think are going to be memorable. But overall, I just didn't like it that much. That's really all I have to say, I guess, for the spoiler-free portion. If you've seen the first one and you liked it, you should see this one. There's some stuff to enjoy in here. There's some parts that made me laugh. There are some parts that I just found pretty memorable, but overall, I didn't like it. But if you're a fan of the first one, I think you will find some things to like at least. So, with that being said, at this point I'm going to get into full spoilers. So if you haven't seen it yet, and you don't want to hear this stuff, thanks for watching, and if you like this content, be sure to like this content. I will be making more of it. And I'm also reviewing some stuff like Stephen King, and this is also a philosophy channel. It's called Our Philosophy Is. If you are interested in any of that, check out my other content, and thank you for watching, and see you next time. Okay, so now actually going into how I feel about specific things in the movie. I liked how this story focused on Elsa and Anna again. They're going to discover this ancient power or something, but I like that they focused on the two of them a little bit more. That was always kind of a big thing with the first movie, was just focusing on the relationship of the two sisters. Usually in Disney movies, it's family is there as a device to distract someone from a romantic interest, which is unfortunate, but it did focus more on the two of them, which was good. Something that bothered me, though, a lot of people were talking about how they wanted Elsa to have a girlfriend. They wanted there to be an LGBT character who was the main character in a Disney movie, someone who's already beloved by a lot of people and who isn't just a side character, or it's not just something that's implied, and they didn't want it to be that. They wanted Elsa to actually have a girlfriend and to have a mainstream major Disney film with a same-sex relationship. What Disney said was, well, that's not really the story we want to tell right now with these characters. And I kind of understand that, because sometimes you got stories where you don't want to introduce any new characters, or you don't really focus on anything romantic, and it's about interpersonal conflict with your family or something like that. I understand that. But after watching this, I was just thinking to myself, this is the story that you had to tell, so you couldn't tell that story? Not only was the story not that great, but there were times in the story where they could have addressed Elsa being an openly gay character. There were things in the story that were explicitly about romance, and to see that passed up for a story like this, which I don't think was that great, and which had romantic elements to it, just makes me think that Disney, I'm sorry, probably is just trying to deal with the fact that there are a lot of people in America, a lot of families, that would not go see this movie if they had a mainstream character who was LGBT, who was openly gay. Not only that, but let's be honest, there are a lot of regions of the world that like to censor media that depicts openly gay characters, or sometimes media that depicts characters that are gay at all. And it becomes really difficult to censor a movie of those elements when the main character has a relationship that is openly gay. It becomes very hard to censor that. And I think Disney knows that, and that's a big conflict on the world stage right now, with media being censored in other countries and them not buying our media if they can't censor it in a certain way. And I think that's something that might have gone into the decision to not make the main character an openly gay character. And I think that is bad practice. I think that's bowing down to the demands of people who are not open to these kinds of relationships that there's nothing wrong with. I think Disney should have taken the risk for the sake of putting this sort of representation on the screen. They said that the reason was that they didn't want to tell that kind of story right now, but I can't help but think that there was probably a more hidden reason, which is they didn't want to risk losing those customers, which I think is kind of shameful if that's the case. I talk about these things not because they really have an impact on my feeling on the actual story of the movie, but they are relevant to understanding the story in its cultural context, and they did inform the story that we got. I understand that this is just speculation on my part, and I don't have any factual basis of anybody admitting this to base this on. So, I'm not claiming that this is definitely the case. I'm saying if this is the case, that was shameful, but I could be wrong about that, so I do acknowledge that. Now I'm going to move on to some of the positives. The music. I talked about how I like the music before. A lot of it's in Dorian mode, which is very medieval sounding. I felt like a huge music nerd for focusing on that, but it was a really cool effect. The music sounded more ancient. That is something that I kind of like. It helped with the environment. Olaf's recap in the middle of the movie. That was absolutely hilarious. When he was going through and recapping everything that happened, that was really funny. It was very self-aware, and it actually surprised me. I didn't think they were going to go that far with that kind of thing, but props for that. Something with Olaf and something with Elsa. This whole thing of the fake out death, it's getting kind of old to me in Disney movies because, you know, I understand if you're a little kid, you need to learn to deal with risk. You know, maybe this is the more cynical side of me, and I know I'm not the target demographic, but I'm sitting here as an adult, like, watching a character supposedly about to die or sacrifice themselves, and to me it's just a big waster of time because I know that the character's going to be fine, and it's kind of frustrating to me. I think there are better ways to do that. You can have suspense with all kinds of things that are not the character death. Or here's an idea: have kids movies where characters actually die. I know that's more controversial, but I mean, you know, it doesn't have to be graphic or traumatizing or anything like that, but I mean, sometimes people die, and sometimes people die unexpectedly, and I don't think it's inherently a bad thing to put that into kids movies. Just with the modern corporate marketing of kids movies, it's like, if we do this, people are gonna get mad, so we can't do it now. You know, when you're watching kids movies, Disney movies from the 70s or 60s, the 90s, the 80s, I think you kind of knew that there was a risk of a character dying. Whereas now that doesn't feel real. So that whole thing with Elsa getting frozen and the whole thing with Olaf getting melted or kind of flurried away, I didn't like that at all. It just seemed like a distraction. A major thing I need to talk about with the story, and I am not oblivious to the fact that a lot of people probably aren't going to agree with me on this. Without spoiling things from this show, I think that there are major things from this movie that were semi-plagiarized from Avatar: The Last Airbender. And I know as soon as I say that, people are gonna immediately think I'm just talking about the Four Elements. The Four Elements being in the movie, and I think that because the Four Elements are in that, they must be plagiarizing from it. And I know that's ancient lore that far, far, far predates Avatar. I understand that. It's not just that. If it was just that, I would be like, of course it's not. That's a very common thing in mythology. No, I saw 2 or 3, maybe 4 things that were happening in the story that already kind of looked like stuff from Avatar, and then you added in the Four Elements thing, and I was just like, okay, this could be one of those situations where someone is just unconsciously including things from a show they really like. That happens to people all the time. Sometimes plagiarism is not intentional. There are other things in the movie that I saw where it looked like they were about to include something that was kind of like Avatar, and then they kind of changed it a little bit. So maybe somebody at the top was aware of this at some point. I'm curious to see if anyone else picked up on that. I wanted to kind of get my opinion on that onto the web before I hear anyone else talk about it, because I wonder if anybody else picked up on this. I don't know. There were moments that I thought were trying to cash in on, well, okay, a sequel's already kind of cashing in, but moments that I thought were trying to overly cash on the success of the first film because they were trying to recreate something. I thought that Elsa's new song was just blatantly Let It Go 2.0 and was not as good. I'm looking at the reviews for this movie on Rotten Tomatoes. Audiences really like it so far. Critics are kind of balanced on it. I saw a lot of rotten reviews on there. It's interesting to me because I find myself in this position, which is similar to a position I often find myself in with these kinds of things, which is I agree with the negative reviews that I didn't like the film that much, but the things people are dinging the movie for, I don't agree with those mostly at all. I saw someone on Rotten Tomatoes ding the movie because it was too different of a sequel. It was not similar enough to the first one, and that's something I almost never agree with. I think it's fine to have a sequel that's way different. I think it's actually fine to have sequels that transcend genres. I think if you start with a romance movie, it's okay to have it followed up by an action movie or an adventure movie or a horror movie or whatever. I think that's fascinating when that happens, when there's different genres in the same universe. That doesn't bother me. I think people need to expand their minds when it comes to what they're expecting from sequels. It's a different story, so that didn't bother me. In fact, I think they could have made Frozen 2 a lot closer to the first one, and that would have been something that I wouldn't have liked as much. They did make it different, and that's not what I really minded. I cared about the story not being that great. Some of the animation in the film was beautiful. It was an improvement over the first one. I kind of wish we would have gotten to different types of environments more often. I would have liked to have seen them venture into even more unknown territories, but they did a decent job with that, I think. Regarding the ending, I'm glad that they did something different with Elsa. It did seem kind of sudden. It did kind of seem like, oh no, this conflict, okay, here it goes. It just kind of seemed like it was over in a flash. That's something that always kind of bothers me, but it didn't feel like a Deus Ex Machina or anything. I thought it was all right. If we have a Frozen 3, maybe they'll do something different. I'm not sure. After this movie, it's like, I don't really know what else they would do with it other than just continue in the same kind of story, which doesn't really allow for a lot of different things. The sequel sometimes is a pivotal movie in the franchise or the first sequel, because that might determine what direction the rest of the movies are going to go in. And as things are, I don't know. I don't really see them going off and doing a ton of different stuff now. I just kind of think they're going to do more of the same. Frozen 2 kind of had an opportunity to really rope me in after the first movie, and it didn't really, unfortunately. So overall, I would say if you don't like the first movie and you're trying to find something to watch, don't really bother with this one. But if you're a fan of the first one, I would say you're probably going to see it anyway, number one. But I think if you love these characters, if you come to love this story, then you should still see it. There's something in there that you will like. This movie is kind of coming off of a year of really strange things on Rotten Tomatoes that I think I need to address here, because we had Joker, and we had Dr. Sleep, which not many people know about. You have this thing on Rotten Tomatoes this year where the audience critic disparity with a movie like Joker was pretty big. And you've got Dr. Sleep right now kind of bombing, which audiences absolutely love. It just kind of frustrates me sometimes that I see big corporate movies like this dominating when I really don't think they have to try that much. Where I think smaller movies are, not even really smaller, just movies that are less mainstream with the subject matter, I see kind of getting squashed over just kind of the big media that is propping stuff like this up. So it's not that like Frozen 2 is a bad movie or anything, or it's not that it's terrible or something like that. I kind of see it as indicative of this culture of, well, we'll just make this sequel and we don't really have to try all that hard, and people will go see it. We just need butts and seats. Disney has this reputation of getting these glowing reviews on Rotten Tomatoes and with critics. I think Disney movies are good, but they ain't that good. Like, they're not so good that nearly every single one's got these like glowing reviews on there. That's just some context for the film that I think is important. Another quick little thing I wanted to add for context for the movie was that when people were debating about whether Elsa should have a female love interest, something that kept coming up was people saying stuff like, well, we don't really want Elsa to have a love interest because we want her to be independent, or she shouldn't be defined by her significant other. And I just need to say that I think reflects a really warped understanding of what relationships are supposed to be. I know this is more kind of getting off on the sidelines, but I think this is something that's important for this video because I'm talking about the film already and sort of the cultural context of this film. If somebody thinks that a relationship is going to tie someone down inherently, if someone thinks that having a relationship makes that person not an independent person, then that kind of relationship is toxic. You need to be able to have relationships with people and still be independent. There's no reason why being in a relationship with someone would make someone tied down in such a way where they couldn't be their own individual. I think people are admitting something about their own viewpoint that they don't even realize they're admitting. If someone is in a relationship with someone who is demanding that that person gives up their individuality, that is wrong, that is not healthy, and that does not reflect what a good, healthy relationship should be. You can be with someone and still be a strong, independent person, and I think it's really important to realize that. Yes, there are sacrifices in relationships. Yes, partners have to put something into the relationship, but that doesn't mean that they're sacrificing who they are, or they're sacrificing their individuality, or that they're defined by the other person, and that's super important to keep in mind. In the case of Elsa, I would say these excuses unfortunately don't hold up. But overall, my review of Frozen 2 is meh. Thank you very much for watching. If you like this content, be sure to like this content, and I will see you next time. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.